Hello, everyone, and welcome to another True Living Masterclass. This month, as you know, we have a guest speaker known as Stellium 7 or Mike Wilkerson. And Mike and I got to spend some time together recently on my European trip because he spoke at the same event that I did and then also attended the same event in Spain, which is actually where he lives. So he was a great host. And I'll tell you that Mike is one of the most interesting people you'll meet because he's done so many different things. In fact, he just released a book about his misadventures as a computer hacker, which he was among the first to suffer the legal consequences of the new cyber crimes that were acted into legislation. And it's a fascinating story, but also he has been a hang glider. He's currently a chiropractor. He's lived all over the world and traveled extensively. And it seems like any subject, if you talk about it, he's done something related to it. So in his research in modern years, he perhaps uncovered a brand new paradigm in geology. And this is going to be the main topic of his talk today. So welcome to the True Living Fellowship, Stellium 7, Mike Wilkerson.
Hey, Andy. Pleasure to be here. Real honor to be invited to talk with your group.
Fantastic. So what are you going to speak about today, or what's the title of your talk?
The title of my talk is Reality, Can You Hack It? And as you mentioned, I might be uniquely qualified to ask that question. But the main topic will be biogeology, which is a term that I coined to distinguish between things that I was finding as I looked into alternative geological narratives and distinguish between that and the mainstream narratives when it comes to geology and how stone is formed and what really happened in the past.
Well, I'll tell you that I saw this talk given in England and was very impressed. And that's why I wanted to bring it to you guys to witness. And then also I got to experience in Mike's own office some of the specimens that he talks about, and looking at them anatomically is really quite impressive, and it really shakes up your mind quite a bit. So brace yourself and take it away, Mike.
Thanks. Let me just get my screen sharing going here. Entire screen. There we go. Share audio. So you should see my title page. Can you see that? Hello, lost you. Anybody there?
Yeah, did you hear me?
Yeah, I didn't hear you, but can you see the title page? Is it ready to go?
Looks perfect.
All right. Yeah, so this is the book that Andy mentioned that has just come out this month after 40 years. In fact, 8 days from now, it'll be the 40-year anniversary from the day that I was busted for computer trespass, infiltrating Microsoft and Boeing and some other companies. And I was the first hacker to go to jail for the crime of hacking. It was a new law. They hadn't defined the cybercrime statutes at that point, and this was really the cutting edge of that. And I was the test case, and the prosecuting attorney who co-authored the law had a vested interest in a sentence that involved jail time. So I got it, and yeah, it's a heck of a story, and everyone who's read it so far says it reads like a movie and is a lot of fun. It's a page turner, and it's a true story. But I'm here to talk about something entirely different today, which is this topic of biogeology and alternative takes on the narratives that surround the origin of stone. So I've always been a questioner and somebody who likes to dig my nose into things that we're told not to. And so I call them the unquestionables. And there's a whole bunch of them that you're not allowed to really look at without being considered a fool by the mainstream. And I think that it's ridiculous to have that mindset, because there's no reason we shouldn't be able to engage in intellectual investigation and see where it leads. And so I suggest that we all be like Toto and pull back the curtain, because it wasn't Dorothy who figured out that the wizard was a fake. It was Toto who sniffed out the culprit. So yeah, it all started for me about 10 years ago. I was aware that there was some questions about the moon landings, and it was a friend of mine, Alex Michael, also known as Conspiracy Music Guru, that started hitting me with questions regarding Earth shape. Thought he was ridiculous and dismissed it, and he brought it up again, and I thought, okay, now I have to debunk this. And I thought it was going to take about 5 or 10 minutes, and here I am years later, still unable to. So along the way, aside from examining the topic of Earth shape and what it is or isn't, other topics came along, like star forts and mud floods, and the idea of Tartaria and the World's Fairs. And each one of these rabbit holes is massive in and of itself. Talked a lot about them on my channel. But this was really how it all began for me, which was examining this idea that there might be giant trees that once existed that are way beyond anything that we were taught is possible. There was a video called No Forest on Earth, and this Geology Revive video touching on these themes. And I thought it was interesting. It was kind of compelling, but it wasn't something that made me want to just like jump in and you know, feet first and investigate it. But the more I learned along the way, the more it started to be very compelling. And so these are pictures that are making the rounds on a lot of the social media platforms now, just looking at this idea that maybe some of these plateau mountains were actually once tree stumps. And the mainstream geological narrative tells us that this is all formed by layers of dead animal and plant life compressing over millions of years, and it gives rise to these sedimentary layers. And I would ask the question, well, okay, if that's true for how this formed, how do you explain concentric circles? This is a place called Jugurtha. And so there's also this idea that Devil's Tower might have once been a tree stump, and that's hotly contested even in the truther community. And I have a problem with that, because to me it's just one of many data points that I'll be sharing with you today. I think it looks like a tree. I lean towards tree, but there's a lot of people who say there's a whole bunch of reasons it couldn't be. I also have looked a lot into the legends, the myths, the fairy tales, the old religious texts, the Bible, the books that were removed from the Bible, like the Book of Jasher and the Book of Enoch, where they talk openly about things like giants and titans and gigantic trees and that sort of thing. And there are a lot of people who have been posting pictures like these, looking at mountainous structures that look like faces, that look like beings that are lying on their back. And I always thought they were fun to look at, but I was also well aware of this concept of pareidolia, which is that you are looking at something and you see a face, but it's not really there, like in a cloud or in knots of wood or something like that. So I think they're fascinating, but in and of themselves, they're not proof of anything. They're just an additional data point. And this particular picture here is fascinating, because this actually looks like a being lying on its side, and then it has these caves that look like eye sockets, and they're anatomically correct and in the right place. And so the question is, was that once a Titan? But there are no follow-ups to any of these photographs, and so that was one of the things that I found annoying. Along the way, I came across this video, which was synthesizing a lot of these ideas by J-Dreamers, and I saw these two pictures below that look a lot like elephants. And I thought, wow, that's fascinating, because here in Spain, in the town that I live in, there's a big mountain called Montgo, M-O-N-T-G-O, that looks a lot like an elephant, and it's known by the locals as the elephant. And but mainstream science tells us that this is impossible, because the gravitational pull of such creatures would be so great that they would collapse under their own weight. Their bones wouldn't be able to support them. And that's based on this theory of gravity, which involves the bending of space-time. And they talk about the square cube law, which is that as something grows in size, its volume scales exponentially. And so they tell us that this is why such creatures just, couldn't have possibly existed, despite the fact that there were things like dinosaurs, which are giant, but they're not mountainous. So again, I was looking at all of these different topics, and I've come to the conclusion that there's a little bit of truth in all of them. And a lot of people get hung up on their pet theory, and they want to focus on everything being something. And I think that there's a little bit of everything throughout the realm, and you'll see examples of that as I continue. So I approach this with the syncretic approach, which is just looking at the overlaps and seeing where are these connections between things, and do those connections make sense, or is it a wacky theory that you have to bend over backwards to make it work with reality? So I just finished giving a presentation in Australia about a month ago, and the theme of that was exiting the rabbit hole. And I think that's absolutely perfect, because so many of us get caught in the rabbit holes, and it can lead to very dark places, and it can be very depressing. So I coined the term prospiracy for the rabbit holes that lead you to better places. Things like virology being pseudoscience. That's a powerful one, because it actually alleviates fear and makes you feel better about what you're doing in life. So my qualifications for what I'm talking about today are completely unrelated. And yeah, I consider myself a survivor of the public indoctrination system. And mostly I consider myself a cross-disciplinary field researcher. And I think this is what really needs to happen, is there needs to be more and more people who aren't in their compartmentalized little section of science, that are cooperating with each other and are open-minded to ideas that are astonishing. So there's a lot of pitfalls when it comes to investigation of this sort. I mentioned pareidolia. Apophenia is a similar thing. That's this idea that you've recognized a pattern that doesn't actually exist. People who have looked into my research that are coming from mainstream thought will say I'm suffering from the Dunning-Kruger effect. I don't know anything about what I'm talking about. I think I'm an expert because I studied it a little bit. And you can decide for yourself about that. But there's a whole bunch of other things that they would bring up. And I've addressed all of these subjects from literally the very first video that I ever made on my channel. And a lot of the people who are criticizing haven't actually gone into the work that I've done or seen the evidence that I'm presenting. So I've always been a real big fan of the scientific method, and I've applied it to my research when it comes to the study of this mountain in Spain, and then the heartstones, which I'll talk about later. And just want to give a recap on the mainstream model. Everything came from nothing 16+ billion years ago, and all this stuff banged around randomly, and then we went from goo to you by way of the zoo, and we get our theories of evolution, and we get all of this this mess that is accepted as settled science. And in my opinion, it's anything but. The Earth is said to be 4.6 billion years old, and we know that because we can look at all of these different layers of strata, and we can look at the fossils that are in the strata, and we can see how old things are, and that all lines up perfectly and justifies the heliocentric model. In the mainstream model, there are 5 great extinctions, the most recent being when the dinosaurs were wiped out 65 million years ago, another when the trilobites disappeared. And so my point here is just that even the mainstream model talks about cataclysm and talks about these great dyings off that have occurred. And but they give us these kinds of stories that the comet struck and wiped out the dinosaurs, and then somehow they all turned into crude oil, and that's why it's a limited resource. So when we look at the mainstream model and the timelines, you can see here we're talking about excessive timelines of hundreds of millions of years for these varying layers. And there's some circular reasoning that happens here, because they'll tell you how old the layer is based on the fossils that are in the layer, but they'll also tell you how old the fossils are based on the layer they're found in. And again, that's said to have come about through dead plant and animal life laying down. And this is the basic cycle of petrogenesis that we're given. The plant life and animal life have created these sedimentary layers, and then all of that pressure of those increasing layers leads to the formation of metamorphic rock, which is a far denser rock that has swirls in it. If you think of marble, that's metamorphic. It's harder, and it has a very biological look to it, which is interesting, especially when you see the kinds of things I'll be presenting in a little bit. So magma would be even more pressure, and that's causing a melting of this, and then that is pushed upward through volcanoes and forming the igneous rock. And so obviously we can see igneous rock forming. We know that it's a real thing. And this is just a nicer graphic for the petrogenesis cycle. So again, I coined the term biogeology, or I appropriated it from a little known branch of science that wasn't using it as far as I'm concerned. And I decided it was the perfect term for distinguishing between the mainstream geological narratives and the idea that maybe petrification happened a lot faster than we were told, and that there was a far more direct connection between biology and geology than what we were taught. So going back to this idea of the tree stumps and Devil's Tower, this is, as I said, a hotly contested idea. We were told that these were formed over 50 million years, where the volcanic lava has worked its way up through the earth. And originally the earth was up here 1,000 feet higher at least. And over a period of 50 million years, that earth disappeared. But at some point, there was some cataclysmic event that caused a rapid cooling. And so that pressure that comes from the expanding liquid as it cools is how these hexagonal columns that structure is made of were formed. That's the official narrative. But then we have other narratives which have to do with the ancient myths and religions, where they talk about things like the world tree. This is Yggdrasil, the Norse mythology. We have lots of old maps that show a 4-continent system at the north and a mountain called Rupes Nigra. Some say that it's a big magnetic mountain, and that is why our compasses point there. And this is another example of the idea of Yggdrasil. We get this in our movies in the form of fantasy, but I think these are ultimately truth drops, or at the very least, it's something that speaks to the heart of all of us. And there's something inside of us that knows that maybe once upon a time, there was a much more beautiful realm that wasn't corrupted and inverted and twisted and warped and perverted like it is now. And the ancients seem to be in agreement with that idea, that we were inside of a cosmic egg. And so there are these disks that exist within the cosmic orb. And a lot of times they'll speak of concentric spheres. There's talk of the music of the spheres, and that the luminaries, the sun and the moon and the wandering stars, our planets, are all existing within this enclosed realm. And I am not a flat earther. I'm a globe skeptic. I think that it's ultimately a false dichotomy. And I'm more in alignment with the idea that we're inside of something like this, probably a toroid. It's a shape that manifests throughout all scales of reality. It exists in our heart. It exists probably in every cell and every atom. And I'll touch on those themes more. So this is lava in action, coming out. Never a straight line whatsoever, but we're told that because of this magic rapid cooling event, that it leads to things like this. And here you get those hexagonal structures, but also an additional hexagonal structure that's even larger. This is exactly how plant and animal life, or plant life, grows, whether it's tree or plant. And even if you bought their narrative for this, the question is, how does something like this form? If this is rapidly cooling lava, why is there this just slice here? And you can't explain that with some kind of glacial movement, because look at the rock behind it. There's so many formations like this that swirl and curve, and it looks exactly like the fibers of something that once grew. Is that proof? No, I think it's just a very, very interesting data point. And even if you buy the mainstream narrative on how this was formed, my question is, how would you apply that to structures like this? This, to me, looks far more biological than something that formed from rapidly cooling lava. And this is just another example where you've got the same columns, but then there's this circular structure inside. So I think the narrative breaks down when you just look at it with a critical eye and you think about it logically. But even if that's not enough for you, you can look at structures like these and try to imagine how the sedimentary layering model would account for the existence of these kinds of structures. To me, all of these have a very biological look to them. And then there are other problems with things like this, where we're told that this is layering that's now perpendicular because of tectonic activity. And even if you buy that, the question is, okay, so the Earth did one thing that created one color for a while, then it went to a darker color, then it went to a lighter color, and then back to the darker color. And then you got things like this. These are called concretions. They're these concentric spheres with all kinds of interesting things inside of them. And I think the entire geological model breaks down with this one photograph here. You can see the lines of this rock, and you can see how they actually extend into what looks like almost a cellular structure, very biological. I can't even begin to explain how this streak of color could be in here, but I don't need to explain it to know that the mainstream explanations for it don't make any sense. This is a place called White Pocket, and I swear, if that doesn't look biological to you, I don't know what to say, but it does not look like something that formed by random chance. This has a very biological look to it in every way. So just getting back to the sedimentary layering model, this has been fully debunked by geologists, actually, but most people don't know about it. This structure here, which is I think over 30 feet tall, was formed in a matter of hours when Mount St. Helens erupted back in the 80s. So let's just listen to what this geologist had to say.
As the grains were being propelled over the surface in a slurry, the particles separated coarse and fine into thin layers. I had thought that a catastrophe would mix up all the particles and make a homogenized deposit. Boy, was I wrong. Right here, a pyroclastic flow moving at freeway speed or higher can separate particles into coarse and fine. So layering doesn't require millions of years, thousands of years, or even hundreds of years. It can form rapidly in this slurry flow process. So Mount St. Helens tells us something really interesting about how rapidly strata can form. There's even micro-thin lamination in this deposit. It's remarkable.
Yeah, so if you think about the Ring of Fire, you know, all of the different volcanoes in the world, imagine if they were all to erupt at the same time. What would that do to the atmosphere? What would that do to temperatures? How would that affect the heat of the Earth? And how much of that kind of layering would we see? So there's a lot of stuff that's just, you know, trust me, bro, that's you know, shared as fact to us and might have other better explanations. So this is the mountain I was referring to earlier, Mont Go. There's a cave exactly where an eye socket would be. This would be the head. This is the body, and can show it with Google Earth images from above. It looks like the remains of a rib cage, and you can see this this structure here of the eye socket. And looking from above, there's a curved section of the mountain here, and another one here, right where the head would meet the body. And there's also a nice deep crevice canyon right here where the legs would separate. So these are all data points. None of them is proof of anything, but taken as a whole, they start to make you wonder. And already after just examining this mountain on Google Earth for an hour, when I first came upon this idea and began to wonder, I had already 10 anatomical features that were present from the macro view with Google Earth. So thinking of my chiropractic education and the scientific method, which I've always been a big fan of, I thought, okay, well, this is an interesting question, and I formulated a hypothesis, and I decided to go and examine that. And I got out my anatomy books, and I started looking at the structure of elephant skulls. Now, it may not be an elephant; it could be some other kind of a vertebrate, but there's a lot of reasons I believe that it is a vertebrate, and I'll share those as we go on. But this is what an elephant skull looks like. This is the eye socket. This is the temporal fossa where one of the chewing muscles is, and the eye sits in here. And this hole right here is what's known as the infraorbital foramen. In humans, we have it here. It's directly below the eye, and in elephants, it's slightly in front of the eye. And when looking at Mont Go, it appears as if it's lying on its stomach with the head tilted backward. So that would put that hole right directly in front of the eye socket. And I'll show you what that looks like on the mountain in a moment. But another thing that's interesting here is that if you look at the human eye, that you can't really see it in this photograph of the elephant, but there are these channels that are going downward into the sinuses. So not only is there a cave here where the eye socket would be, but there's a deeper cave that I've explored, and in the Unveiling a Titan series, in the second video, I've gone into that cave and showed what that looks like as well. So it's just one data point after another. And already on Google Earth, I could see this hole here, and I'm like, that looks exactly like an infraorbital foramen. What are the odds? And this is what that structure looks like looking through it. So it's just another of many data points. And I went about this in a very methodical and thorough fashion, got this 3D anatomy, and obviously that's human, but it's all of the vertebrates have similar morphological structure when it comes to the skull. There's 7 different bones that make up the eye socket, and they have meeting points that are known as sutures. And that last image, which flashed by very quickly, showed this optic fissure that is that it also appears to be present in the cave. So just to give you an idea of the kind of specificity we're talking about here, here's the eye, and this is the line that goes between the frontal bone and the maxilla bone, and this is known as a suture line. And in that exact same place in the cave is this structure right here. And you can see that this isn't a crack in the wall of the cave. This is like an overlapping structure. And the degree of specificity with that is off the charts, as is this. Here's the optic fissure right here. And you can see this structure here, and it's in the exact same place in the cave. And then this thing sticking up, I hypothesized early on that that could be the remains of the eyeball. And boy, was I surprised when I went back up there with some friends. I'll tell you about that in a moment. So along the way, as I was investigating the mountain, I hypothesized that this quarter moon structure here that looks like, it almost looks like an ear was removed. And that is in the exact place where an ear would be on an elephant. And so as I was trying to figure out where to go so I could get a closer look at this to see if there was a cave up there, I was on Google Earth and I discovered that there was this link called Cova del Migdia. And I clicked on it, and it turns out that there was a team of archaeologists and geologists who had gone up and had thoroughly excavated this cave. They went in with 3D mapping. They went in with 3D photography. There were skeletons. There were cave paintings. And it was an absolute mind blow. I thought I was in the Twilight Zone when I started to look into this. Check this out. They went up with harnesses and ropes to get inside, mapped it out with 3D technology. That looks a lot like the curve of a cochlea. And here's the fly-through. So it's just, again, I'm going to say, what are the odds? Probably 100 times during the remainder of this presentation. But there's a 4-legged creature there with horns that looks like a deluge coming down. Maybe the ancients had memories of what had taken place before. This is the area where there's been a collapse of the mountain, and that collapse just happens to be right where a breathing cavity of an elephant would have been. So I went up there again with some friends to show them the things that I had found, and one of them noticed this structure here. I'd already theorized that things that were fat could potentially petrify to quartz of varying types, and also sap does the same thing. And if you look here, this is an eyeball, and this fatty section here, this would be anchored into the back of the eye. And I hypothesized that this section here was exactly that, and that the remains of it are still there. But what my friends noticed that blew my mind was that this whole structure here was actually a 10-inch thick layer of quartz, and it was exactly where the sclera would be, which is the white of the eye, which is all fat. So another aha moment. And in a live stream, I was in an interview, and I was trying to show the things that I had shown many times before. And I went on Google Earth and saw that the mountain had been edited so that in the weirdest way, if you zoom in on it now, the eye will open up or close if you zoom away. But this is what it looked like initially. I was using Google Earth as a drone because it's a national park and you're not allowed to fly drones there. You can see that ear structure, the eye, and I was just using Google Earth in any way that I could to get some footage that I couldn't get myself. And you can see here how it looks now in the lower right. As soon as you pull away, it closes and opens, and it's just kind of one of those moments. A lot of people were on the fence about my research until I came out with the 5th video showing that change. So looking at limestone, interestingly enough, limestone is said to be formed from coral forams, mollusk, and skeletal fragments. That's what the mountain is made of. So even mainstream geology is telling us that this mountain, in a way, is made of bone. But if you look at the structure of bone, it matches to a T the kinds of rocky structures that are found all over. We have these long sections of the bone which are thick, and they're known as cortical bone, and then inside is the trabecular bone. That's where the red blood is made. That's where our bone marrow is. And this is what some of the rocks look like on the mountain. Take a look at this. So these channels are branching off in the same way that blood vessels do. Oh, okay. And I have another presentation where that's actually video and it actually gets in with the camera, but you can get a sense of what it looks like here. There's no way this was formed by water erosion, because it's starting with a bigger channel that then branches off into smaller and smaller channels. So I think the mainstream narrative on how karst was formed debunks itself. Here's an example of the larger structures, and you can see this chunk is broken away, and it's exposing this red earth that's actually coming out of the channel. The entire mountain is covered in red earth, iron ore, which would make sense if you think of blood, the red blood cells and the hemoglobin that's found in them. And then we have the plasma of blood, which is comprised of long chain fatty acids. So if you think of these kinds of oils here, olive oil, fish oil, and if you remove all the water from that, you get something that looks like little quartz crystal flakes. So the Unveiling of Titan series is quite interesting. I go into much more detail, obviously, than I have here. There are over 50 anatomical correlations that I've cataloged in the last 7 years. And again, going back into the problems that I had with this kind of research, pareidolia, photos from one angle, people not accounting for the effect of shadows and foliage or snow and that sort of thing. There's a lot of Photoshop junk out there, and there are a lot of people that just see faces and things and think that it's a real face. So my approach was very different. I analyzed aerial footage. I'm looking at anatomical and histological correlations, did extensive on-site investigation, including spelunking in the caves, which at moments was terrifying, and microscopy, CAT scans of the heart stones, endoscopy. And so that leads to this subject of the heart stones. So as I started to look at all geology with new eyes, I came across this stone and was absolutely blown away. It's about 4 times the size of a human heart. I picked it up in a river bottom and I started looking at it, thinking about how unusual it was. And right off the bat, I started to notice several features in the right place for a heart. And so this would be your aorta, your vena cava. This would be your coronary artery, the coronary sulcus, the fat that's found between the left atrium and the left ventricle. I'll show you examples of that in fleshy hearts in a moment. And this structure here, the pulmonary arteries, has what's known as an isthmus, and that's exactly what you're seeing here. And so I started cataloging all of those features. There's 25 here for your evaluation list. A lot of people have started sending me photographs and videos of different heart stones that they've found around the world. And this is just showing you, again, what those structures look like. The size and shape can change dramatically depending on the species of the creature, but in general, the overall structure of the heart and how it functions is identical, at least in mammals. So again, I thought, well, if there's any truth to this, I should be able to find more. So I went out looking for more, and I started to recognize a pattern in the stones that for all intents and purposes should not be there. We're told that these are broken fragments of larger structure that have bounced around in river bottoms and eroded, and that has given rise to these shapes. But as I show in many videos, there's such a high degree of specificity and correlation with heart anatomy that there's absolutely no way that that could come about by chance in a river bottom. And so I made many videos on that subject. And this is what hearts look like. You can see it's got the pericardium. This is a thick, fatty layer of all of the organs in the body. It has the thickest layer. Sometimes the hearts can be without blood and they're ghostly white. It's primarily a fascial matrix. They're actually growing them in laboratories now. And there's videos that I've shown on my channel where they unclamp the blood vessels and let the blood in. And within 2 to 3 seconds, they look like this. So a lot of the stones that I've found and shown are ghostly white. but if you break them open, they look fleshy inside. And I've got a video doing exactly that. I went and had them CAT scanned. I got endoscopic cameras so I could go into the chambers. And interestingly enough, this structure is totally bumpy here, which isn't consistent with what I would expect to find with water erosion, but it's actually perfectly consistent with what's known as trabecula carne, which is the internal structure of the heart. And if this were to petrify, it would definitely be bumpy. I had them sliced open, I polished them, and when you polish them, more of the color comes out. And it's really fascinating because when you wet them as well, the best of preppers. Anyway, all right, this is a new one. Set them, so I'm not the best of preppers. Anyway, this is a new one. You know the routine, right? And you can see the lines there. But so the sulcus lines are where the folds of the heart meet. It's a highly specific feature. Out at sunset for a little less than an hour. I got about a half a dozen of them. But this one, look at this. These are twin flames here. This one is new. Sulcus line, indentation, tapered. Another sulcus line. Same exact rock. Even down to the sulcus lines. Underwater, that's a beautiful stone. And then look at this little one I found too. It's a beauty. Indentation at the top for the blood vessels. The indentations or openings are never, ever on the bottom of these stones. We're never taught that... This is a big one. That stones might have an orientation. It just looks almost bloody. Same with this. Missing a chunk. And on the inside, darker red. So, yeah, every once in a while I got to go out and get a little inspiration for this stuff. But so I could just spend the next hour just showing the heart stones that I've gathered, and if there's time at the end, I'll show. There's half a dozen here that I got just in the last couple days. So I didn't understand how petrified hearts could be found out of the body. That's one of the things that people ask me immediately, and I couldn't answer the question for a long time. Now I have a theory. I call it boiled egg theory. My theory is that whatever cataclysmic event would have petrified the Elephant Mountain or turned these hearts to stone would have been so powerful that it would destroy the outer portions of the body, while the heart and the other organs would be literally boiled inside of the chest and abdominal cavities, which would function like a pressure cooker. And then what happened to the bones is often a question that I'm asked. And with bone broth, if you cook bone inside of a crock pot for hours and hours, it softens to sponge and then eventually becomes like gel. So it's very possible that the organs and the bones could have dissolved in the petrification process. So along the way, I came across this man's work, and I'm just going to show this 1-minute video because it's so important, and most people have never heard this information. And even cardiologists have not been taught this, and it's not integrated into the surgery programs, which is absolute insanity.
Did you know that almost everything you were taught about the heart is wrong? Most everyone today, even doctors, still believe the heart to be a 4-chamber pump that pushes blood through a mind-boggling 60,000 miles of narrowing blood vessels to fuel our 40 trillion cells, then filling again as if by magic on relaxation. Well, that theory was thoroughly debunked by the Spanish cardiologist Francisco Torrent Guasp back in 1972. After dissecting thousands of hearts, Guasp finally discovered the heart's true structure. The heart's far more amazing than we ever knew. It's like a rope, a long tube wrapped into a knot. Instead of being pushed, the blood is pulled through the heart in 2 spiraling vortexes. This has been proven with CAT scans, functional MRI, and positronic emission. Look at the spiraling contraction. It changes everything we know about the heart and circulation. If you'd like to know more, check out these videos.
So the heart is a rope, it's a vortex, and even the muscle fibers themselves are spiraling, and you can see that here. And this was a mind blow for me because when I watched this documentary about this man's life and learned this for the first time, I saw him roll the heart back up, and I saw these lines which I had seen in the stones, and I ran to my collection, and these are very specific lines in specific places. and it matched up perfectly. The main one would be the front interventricular sulcus, and then these are on the back side where the flaps meet. And from the bottom, the heart, as you saw in that animation, is twisting like a spiral, and it looks a lot like a propeller blade. And what I found as I looked at the stones that were already in my collection is that many of them had that twist at the bottom. So I made a video about that and about the synchronicities. Francisco Torrent Guasp lived and worked his whole career out of in private practice out of his home, and his home was on Montgo, and I had no idea. He literally lived and worked on the same mountain that I had been investigating. So these are the things that make all of this compelling. It's scalable, it's repeatable, it's specific. They're empirical finds. It's not just a theory tale. There's logical consistency, and they're even predictable. I've found stones that were partially buried, and I've uncovered them after predicting what the rest of the stone would look like, and was correct on multiple occasions. So I shouldn't be able to do that with a buried stone, like predict what the rest of it is going to look like. These are different examples of far more colorful ones that have been sent to me from around the world that are really amazing. And so, you know, this gets to the idea that petrification is an indisputed fact. We know that it exists. We have petrified all kinds of things, especially trees, these pine cones that you see here. And petrified wood can be made in a laboratory in a matter of a day. It's literally, it takes 24 hours for them to make petrified wood that is indistinguishable from naturally occurring petrified wood under a microscope. They've also done an experiment where they suspended wood, 7 different pieces, in high mineral content waters in, I think they were Japanese geologists, and they showed that by the 7th year that the wood was fully petrified, and that's just from high mineral content waters. So there's a whole bunch of things that can lead to petrification. I've come to the conclusion that anything can petrify. These are 2 examples of petrified brains, and as I talked about the idea that petrified fat would become quartz, here you can see this section of the brain is broken away and it's quartz inside. We make our own stones, gallstones, kidney stones, anything that can petrify, like a lymph node could also potentially be a stone. This is what they look like when you take them in cross section. They look just like geodes. There's zillions of anomalous petrified finds that really break the geological paradigm that we're not taught about. Petrified this, that, and the other. I'll give you a little video clip that shows that. Here you see petrified jellyfish. This should not be possible. And a fish in the process of eating another fish. Check this out. This is amazing.
I'm about to show you 5 different examples of rock forming quickly. Then I'm going to ask you a question about a dinosaur bone I'm going to show at the end. From Karlovy Vary in the Czech Republic, mineralized water went through these pipes and formed this in 80 years. Here's a spark plug in stone, no more than 20 to 40 years to form this. This little guy right here was put into a mineral springs in Karlovy Vary, and within just 6 weeks, it turned to stone. And this right here, this is the same material you find in stalactites and stalagmites in those caves that they say are millions of years old. This right here took 6 months to form. Here's the question. Here's a dinosaur vertebrae. If these right here can form in that length of time, anywhere between weeks to months to years, how long does it take to fossilize a dinosaur bone?
That's a very good question. So I'm going to skip ahead. I don't have enough time to go into, there's so much material. There are literally multiple live streams that are 3-4 hours long on my channel where I'm just going through all the data. But these are some of the examples of the petrified remains of the gigantic trees. The sap is petrifying to quartz, and also things like opal, things like obsidian, these are all coming from tree. And I don't have time to really go in and show. I've done entire multi-hour presentations just on the evidence for the trees alone. Check those out. It'll blow your mind, and it'll change the way you see reality permanently. It's all around us, but we're paradigm blind, another expression I coined, because that's the only explanation for why geologists can't see what's right in front of their eyes. This is so clearly tree, and it's manifesting it in every single way from the micro to the macro, but we're taught that it's impossible. This is obsidian, and you can see that you've got these layers of tree grain, and then it vitrifies or glassifies. We've got examples of geodes, which I talked about already. Just going to fly through some of these. There's an infinite variety of outcomes. And why haven't people noticed this? They're blinded by their paradigm. They're suffering from expertitis. There's a compartmentalization that exists in academia, and maybe intentional obfuscation. Obviously, if this is true, then they're going to know where all the really valuable stuff is when it comes to mining. And the people who believe the mainstream narratives are going to be lost when they're trying to find the most valuable materials. So more data points to consider: the salt mines, these are the marble caves in Patagonia. They have these concentric rings in them, which make no sense in a mainstream geological model. How could this form from things just laying down? I'm sure they'll come up with some far-fetched explanation. But all of these data points taken as a whole all dovetail perfectly. And so that's why looking at this with syncretic eyes gives a completely different outcome than if you just listen to the experts. So I don't think most of the experts are trying to mislead people. I think that they're just trying to fit their discoveries into a flawed paradigm. And there's so many examples that I could show of the trees. This is just one of many that are just astonishing. There's no way that this is formed the way we were taught. And obviously, these are all my opinions, so take it for what it's worth. But there's a whole lot of people who've seen this evidence and are in complete agreement. So let me see, what can I fly through? I think Petra was formerly tree. You can see it very clearly when you look at it from the inside out. This is in Jordan. You can see all the micro layering of the wood. We're told that amber is petrified sap. I no longer believe that, because amber is very soft. You can dent it with your finger. I believe fully that quartz is sap. And just like we have scabs on our skin, the sap is the scab for the tree. So it's blocking things. So these are just some of the absolute best sites. I've toured these sites in person with Hangman 1128. It's an amazing channel to check out. He's the top guy in the world for showing footage of the evidence for the great trees. And I got to tour with him for a week last year in the Black Hills of South Dakota, and in Colorado as well. We went to the Garden of the Gods. So sap can take many colors. It can be green, it can be red, it can be orange, and it can also contain metal. And that's important for other reasons I don't have time to go into. Here you can see water gushing out of this tree. There's many videos of these sorts of things happening where it's tapping into the waters below. And then there's the Action Adventure twins, who are going down these massive channels that look identical to what you would expect a gigantic tree to look like. You can see like people have hacked this tree with a machete and it's just gushing like a fire hydrant. Begs the question again, what about Devil's Tower? And are these tree roots that we're looking down through? And I believe so. Lava tubes don't make any sense. You've got these lines going one way, and then in another tube, they'll go this way. And that we're told that this is formed by lava pushing out. You've got the tepuis, which are these never-ending waterfalls that are coming from the tops of mountains, and it couldn't possibly be coming from rainfall. They call them artesian wells. And yeah, so where's the truth in all of this? Again, I think the answer is probably E, all of the above. I think there were giant trees. There were ancient miners that were mining on an incredible scale. Tartaria, star forts, mud floods, even meltology, which I thought was ridiculous initially, seems to have some substance to it. So I had to eat crow on that one. These are some of my videos, and thank you all for listening.
Well, that was fantastic, Mike. Always just like really does change the way that you think about everything in nature. Obviously we don't have conclusive evidence, as you stated, but there are, you know, quite a lot of circumstantial evidence available, and correlations with anatomical features is, you know, just really kind of mind-blowing. I'm glad you also brought up, you know, the helical heart, and I've had Manel Ballister, a cardiologist, that picked up on some of the work of the doctor you talked about. And he's going to be actually at the Weston A. Price conference next weekend, where I'll be also.
I saw that. Give him my regards. He and I have spoken, and I had a video call with him. He was good friends with Francisco Torrent Guasp, who made the helical heart discovery and facilitated the first dissection of a human heart, because Guasp was only getting animal hearts from butchers. He didn't have access to human hearts. So he was able to confirm, thanks to Manel Ballister, that the same was true of the human heart as it is of the animal hearts. And I reached out to him, and we had a conversation, and I showed him some of these stones that I've presented in the today, and pointed out the different anatomical correlations, and he was absolutely blown away. And at one point, before giving another presentation, I reached out to him and asked him, "Hey, what did you think of the things that I showed you?" And he said that it was a mind-blowing discovery, and he congratulated me, and so I consider him to be the greatest living cardiologist, because he's totally, you know, furthered the work of Guasp since his death about, I don't know, 17 years ago or so, and you know, has really brought that information forward about the helical heart, and I'm totally honored that he thought that was a compelling idea. So
yeah, no, it's definitely great to have that kind of external validation. And, you know, just so everybody out there knows that Mike is not sculpting these heart rocks, you know, in his basement. We actually found one. Actually, we found a couple when we were traveling together. One at an English estate, and one up on the mountains near Mount Go.
Yeah. So, I mean, just in 2 days of walking around, I found this one. It's not so detailed. I'll just show these real quick. And it's this reoccurring pattern that can't be explained by just banging around in a river bottom. And a lot of times they'll have the sulcus lines, as you can see there, the indentations at the top, and the backside will be flat or concave. And you can really get a sense of it, because when the heart goes into contraction, which it does on death for rigor mortis, it tapers in on the sides. You'll get that twisting at the bottom, and then it'll be, like I said, flat or concave on the back. And this one was really nice. I found this one last night, and you can see there's the indentations at the top, that concave backside, the twist. How specific is that, and how repeatable and how scalable? And then this one is amazing underwater. It looks like blood when you get it wet. I found that one as well yesterday. And then just one last one to show here. The pericardium is still present, or what I believe is the pericardium, but it's worn away, and everywhere it's worn away, it's just bright red underneath. So, and there's the twist again.
Well, it definitely does not seem random. So before we ramble on any further, in the few minutes we have left, why don't we take a couple of questions?
Happily.
All right. So Cedric asks, does this change the way we have been calculating the age of things, like the pyramids and other ancient structures?
Yeah, I don't usually go into dating, because I have no way of knowing. The dating techniques are sketchy when you start to look into them. There's a whole lot of things that I don't have time to go into now about why they're sketchy. But and you know, the age of the Earth and the age of the universe and all these things that we're told as fact, I think is absolute bullshit. And I think that we live in a created realm that is probably a heck of a lot younger than we were taught. But how old it is and when things happened, I don't know. That's for someone else to figure out.
Well, now, Mike, you did give a couple of data points in your lecture. I mean, one about how the sediment can form rapidly, like the sedimentary layers of rock, right, that we saw from Mount St. Helens. And you also talked about how rapidly things can become petrified like trees, right? So relying on the timelines that it takes, millions of years for these things to occur, randomly through the forces of nature, doesn't really prove anything. It's like a form of circular reasoning. And, I'll tell you one thing about carbon dating, right, which is definitely used to determine the age of like human remains or fossils and things like that, right, that were living organisms. That my son, this came up when he was doing biology, and it kind of course, the textbook just assumed this was true. But I challenged him. I said, why don't you just investigate, like, is that method validated? And he did. This is a 15-year-old at the time, some very cursory research, and he found that the isotope of carbon that they were using didn't have a fixed half-life. So all the dates were tied to like the half-life of this isotope, which was variable. So, that was all it took to debunk it. It's just that we sometimes don't look into the fundamental, research that these methods come from.
Yeah, I totally agree. And also, as I mentioned before, it's crucial for their paradigm because the timelines for geology are in alignment with the timelines for the whole Big Bang cosmology as well. So it's, one is needed for the other to be accurate.
Right.
I saw a question here. Do you think Tartaria is a distraction to misguide people down the wrong path and make them to appear silly? Absolutely not. Whether it was called Tartaria doesn't matter, but the evidence of a worldwide civilization is gargantuan. There's so much evidence, and you can look at the ancient structures, you can look at the star forts, the evidence of flooding. There's so much evidence there, and the people who are saying there isn't any, I don't trust at all. I've been looking into this for the last 8 years, and there is a ton of evidence that shows that history, as we were taught, is a fabrication.
All right. Dory Johnston asks, wow, thank you. You're quite welcome, Dory. I'm co-leading a biology class to homeschool teens. Oh, that sounds great. What would you recommend I share with them to introduce them to these ideas? Thank you again.
Well, what I would, you could start with, I have a video called Biogeology 101 on my channel, which is basically a longer version of what I did today. I think it's about 2 hours long. And, I wouldn't present any of that information as fact. I would just say, look, these are other ways of looking at things. Decide for yourself which makes more sense and investigate it.
Another thing, it might be interesting to take the kids on a field trip and find some heartstones. Do you have any suggestions about what kind of places to look that would give you?
Yeah, places where you find cobblestone, river rock, seashores with stone. You'll see that some stone is broken fragments, and that is from a larger structure. You can see that it broke off. But then there's other stones like the ones I showed you today, which are encapsulated. We're told that they look that way because they've eroded, but in reality, there are no fractures on them. As soon as there's any kind of a fracture, it's extremely noticeable. So those are the spots that I would go looking and have them, go through either this presentation or one of the ones on my channel and really get familiarized with hard anatomy. A lot of people, they do a cursory examination and then they think they know what they're looking at, and then they send me rocks and I'm just like, oh, I don't know, it's a rock, but some people have really gotten it, and they've sent me some specimens that have blown my mind.
That's very exciting. Let us know how it goes with those teenagers, if they're open to the ideas or not. All right. Elizabeth Simpson asked, have you looked into the human remains or cavities produced by same from the eruption of Mount Vesuvius?
Yeah, that one is, there's some evidence to suggest that might have been a hoax, that you've got, that they might have filled cavities with different material. I don't know. It's inconclusive. There's also a vitrified brain that's said to be the only one ever found that came from Vesuvius, where basically the heat was so intense that it melted the fat to a glassy-like substance. But I showed 2 photographs of petrified brains that have been found in this presentation. So right off the bat, their claim that that's the only one is wrong. I don't find a lot of brain. I think that that it's not protected in the same way, like our chest and abdominal cavities are like pressure cookers, and the organs are literally floating in liquid. So that's why I came up with the boiled egg theory. I think the brains might be destroyed because I don't find them. I've found a half a brain. Some might say I have one.
More like 1.5, Mike.
Thank you.
All right. Cedric asks, are those paintings behind you, Mike, your creations?
They are indeed. They're not paintings, though. They're actually photography. They're an art project that I did about 13 years ago. I did a few big exhibitions showing the work, and I've got a big one over there that's about 2 meters wide, and yeah, it's just something that I hit upon about 15 years ago and just loved the results, and I kept rolling with it. They're on my website, which is incomplete, and they are for sale, but I've never actively tried to market them.
See, this is what I was talking about, how there isn't something that Mike hasn't done or dipped his toes into. All right. Do we have any more questions? I think we maybe have time for one more. But Mike, do you know of any, books or print material on this topic, or like regarding the structure of trees, perhaps?
Yeah, there's a book that was written on a few books. One would be Re Metallica, which is an old 16th century Spanish book that was translated into English that talks about all kinds of mining techniques and how to find things. And there's hints in there about this stuff. Another would be a book by a man named Louis Chevron, Kervran, which is called Biological Transmutation. So I believe that there's electrical and plasma transmutation that's coming about as a result of great force, but also that things can biologically transmute. So the perfect example of that is the egg. The calcium that's in the eggshell is greater than the calcium that the chicken is consuming each day in its normal dietary, acquisition. So that's pretty interesting, because that means that the chicken somehow has to be synthesizing calcium. Well, calcium's on the periodic table. We're told that can't happen. The things that are on the periodic table are born in the hearts of stars, which then explode and spread their materials out into the universe, and that's where we get our elements from. And other than that, the elements can be formed in things like, nuclear fission chambers and that sort of thing. But they don't talk about biological transmutation at all, because it's a deal breaker for the mainstream model, in my opinion. Yeah. So,
well, I'll tell you, there's some interesting things about that, because you're right with the supposed calcium levels in the eggshells and such, that they, exceed the calcium stores of the egg-laying hen. And there's many other examples that, couldn't readily be explained. And of course, the body is a device that transmutes things, right? Because everything that we eat as food becomes something totally different once it enters our body through, digestion, respiration, all these functions, right? And we also have the model, because what you're saying here is possibly one element turns into another, like maybe sodium becomes calcium, for example. But there is accepted models of that, because we have, radioactive decay, nuclear fission, and nuclear fusion. So, of course, we're not trying to say that there's nuclear reactions going on inside your body in that accepted way, but there certainly is real model and real evidence that one thing can become another thing. So it's not that far-fetched.
Yeah. My take now, I'm more in alignment. I think that there's much better periodic tables that are a better reflection of reality than what we've been given. I think that the current periodic table has been specifically designed to function for what is needed, but to mislead people about the true nature of our reality. And I would look into the works of someone like Walter Russell and look at his periodic table and decide for yourself whether that makes more sense. And I'm not saying that's the correct one, but to me, it's far more in alignment because it matches and mirrors things like music and cymatics and this fractal nature of reality far more than that block that we were shown in chemistry does.
Right. Well, I'll definitely agree that there are some serious limitations. First of all, the whole idea of atomism, but and the periodic table has a lot of information related to that. But there is, and also more ridiculous things like the actinide and lanthanide series of substances not actually existing in nature, only being, a blip on an instrument that allegedly they existed for a picosecond in time. But there is some utility because things in certain columns do have similar physical properties and such. So there is utility in it, but it really comes from alchemy. And if you look at what the elements are in alchemy and how they're represented, we see that there are fewer of them because some of the things that in the periodic table are really said to be made up of other things. Kind of like thinking about an alloy, right? If we have, brass, for example, it's an alloy. It's made up of different metals, including copper and other metals. And so those could be separated out of it, but you can see brass is a different material and it has its own properties as well. So, there's a lot of things to consider when trying to understand all of the aspects of matter and different materials.
Yeah, I think atomism and the periodic table as it is now is, like I said, you can utilize it, but it's also designed to mislead. And ultimately what we're looking at is, there's this false dichotomy between the real sciences of chemistry and physics, and then you look at, physics and psychology and metaphysics and all of this stuff that they would consider the woo non-real sciences. And originally that was all encapsulated into one thing that we called alchemy. And I would definitely refer to the work of Stephen Young and his book, A Fool's Wisdom, for just a general overview of that. He's a nuclear and quantum physicist, PhD, who...
Mike, I can do one better because you can actually go back and check out Steve's Masterclass. Which he did for us here. And we had A Fool's Wisdom as the book of the month that month. And I definitely recommend that you go back and check that book out if you haven't. I'm sure we'll have Steve back in the future. And so, Mike, I just want to thank you so much for taking the time. It's probably like late in the evening where you are right now.
Just
not
7.
Too late, 7 p.m. Well, definitely time for different kinds of activities at that hour. Alexander, I want to thank you also for all your work behind the scenes and for putting up those links for the books and to Stellium's 101 video and all of that. So everyone, spend some time, look more into these issues, find some heartstones, post your pictures of them on the fellowship on Circle, and we'll see you for the Q&A and for another masterclass next month.
Thank you, everybody. It was a pleasure to be here with you.